follows an extract from my book Fête Fatale, available from Amazon. Chapter 13, Part 2. Sergeant Maddox had spent a dreary morning ploughing through reams of pages of John Barlow's accounts and bank statements. It was a tedious business, and he frequently needed to revisit pages once he realised that his attention had waned and he hadn't actually registered any of the figures he'd been glancing over. James had told him to look for large or unexplained sums of deposit or expenditure, but as far as Maddox was concerned, almost all of the amounts that he were reading were to be considered large, and many of them didn't make a great deal of sense. In the run of his own financial dealings, he certainly didn't deal in figures with this many digits. There were the usual payments to official bodies, such as tax payments, national insurance contributions, and other legal necessities. Payments had come in from foreign banks, but these had continued over long periods of time, and although he couldn't make a great deal of sense of them, he discounted them as regular and therefore acceptable. Maybe it was rental agreements from his property abroad. These deposits had slowed down more recently, and this bolstered the theory that they were the rental payments which were now in jeopardy. Only in the most recent accounting quarter did any item of interest appear, and even this was only a singular deposit of a relatively small amount, although to the wallet of Sergeant Maddox it was still a sizable sum. It was the name of the payee that primarily gave rise to interest. Earlier that summer, the ledger showed a single payment of £15,000 from Jefferson Properties Limited, and once the cash was cleared, the sum had been transferred into John's personal bank account. Maddox had arranged to meet Jefferson at his company's office later that day, and he would be sure to ask him about this payment. As far as Maddox was aware, John hadn't dealt with Jefferson Properties on a business level. If the transaction was business related, why then was the money transferred to John's own personal bank account? A brief meeting with John's solicitor revealed that all of Barlow's property portfolio was now up for sale, except in their residential address in Mossleigh. Even the holiday home in France was now on the market. It was ironic. If John had done this some months ago, he wouldn't have been in such financial difficulty just before he died. It transpired that although Jean was now quite a wealthy lady from a long-standing life insurance policy and didn't now need the capital releasing from the properties, she had instructed the sales to go ahead as she didn't want the hassle and didn't understand how to deal with all the business affairs. This seemed reasonable enough. The meeting with Jefferson couldn't be described as a signal success. When confronted with the subject of depositing a lump sum into John Barlow's bank account, he was totally unabashed. "I didn't realise that it was a topic worthy of consideration. I knew that you'd have gone over Barlow's accounts with a fine-tooth comb, so I just presumed that you'd know all about it. It's a trifling sum, and I didn't think you'd find it worthy of speculation," said Jefferson. "I'm afraid that the financial world in which you live is very different from the one which I'm accustomed to, sir. In my will, £15,000 would never be referred to as a trifling sum and would always be of interest to me." "What was the payment for?" said Maddox. "I told John to think of it as a penance payment, a secular act of contrition. I've made a lot of money by dancing on the edge of legality, and over the edge of it too. John was in such a state for ready cash, and he was pitiable. He was in such a blind panic that he simply wasn't thinking clearly. He couldn't accept that he'd have to take the rough with the smooth like the rest of us. He kept talking of being a failure and worrying about what Jean would think. I offered a lump sum to buy him some thinking time. Of course, he said that he couldn't accept such an offer. He's of the old school like that. I'd seen his bank details before when he was asking my advice, and I have a good memory when it comes to numbers. I instructed my secretary to transfer the money into John's account. I assumed that he'd swallowed his pride and accepted the cash, as he never returned it. When he spoke to me on the day of the fête, I think he tried to thank me in his own stumbling, awkward way. It had obviously stung him having to accept it, mumbling about appreciating my generosity. I brushed over it quickly to help him save face. So you're asking me to believe that the cash was a gift to appease your conscience? Indeed I am. Whether you believe it or not, it's the only explanation that I can offer. I suppose I could have told you that it was a loan. I may even have hinted that John could think of it that way if it helped him to accept it more easily. From my point of view, I never expected it back. I've never conducted any business with John, so I can't give any other explanation than the one I just have. It's the truth. I think I believe you. Perhaps the business world isn't as harsh as I'd thought. Oh, I think you'll find that it is just that. It takes a holiday at Her Majesty's pleasure to make you see a different side. That and a steadfast wife. While you're in your Good Samaritan phase, perhaps you could help me with this list of names. What can you tell me about any of the people on this list? This looks like an exotic bunch. Frankos, Alexis Spiros, Salvatore Magella. I've heard of the last two, I think. I think these last two are linked to the Spanish property market, although much more than that I can't tell you. I know that you've got me down as a hardened criminal, but my misdemeanour runs to being too clever with numbers for my own good. I've no knowledge of what you'd personally consider as out-and-out bad guys, and I'm certainly not one. Even when I was in prison, I didn't mix with the criminals, other than was absolutely necessary. I helped the officers prepare their accounts, legitimately, and I set up spreadsheets for the wardens and the prison librarian. I didn't make any underground connections. I only know enough of these last two to know that if their names show up on any transaction, it pays to walk away fast. No matter how lucrative the deal, I know to avoid any further negotiation. They are not good news. After that, I'm afraid that I'm in the dark and choose to remain so. As Maddox was similarly in the dark, there wasn't much he could say on the subject and was unable to attempt to coax any further information out of Jefferson, presuming that he knew more than he had said. Either this set of leads had led him down an investigative cul-de-sac, or Jefferson was such a charming and consummate liar that Maddox had met his match. If there was more to be learned here, he would have to hand over to DCI James. For the full book of Fête Fatale, available in paperback or as an ebook, follow the link in the cards in the description box or find details on my website at sharonbill.com. Thanks for listening.